Ask anyone what their favourite cult classic car is, and there's a very good chance they'll point you to this. Recently-ish sold on PistonHeads Auctions is this BMW Z3 M Coupe, and when it launched in the late 1990s, it didn't win many admirers, mainly for the way it looks, and you may have heard some of the nicknames it's been called over the years. Some nice ones like the breadvan, and some slightly mean ones like the clown shoe, or even the hearse. But one era's ugly duckling is another's swan, and 25 years on, there's a lot more admirers now for the Z3 M Coupe. Here's why.
Remember to head over to PistonHeads.com to research and buy your next car. Normally, a car maker goes about building a convertible by chopping off the roof of a coupe, strengthening the chassis up a bit, and calling it a day. Except that wasn't the case with the BMW Z3. The Roadster arrived in 1995 as a rival to the hugely popular Mazda MX-5, only with a more premium feel, sportier engines, and a badge that wouldn't turn off those terrified of being seen in something that isn't German. The only problem is the Z3 suffered from a few dynamic quirks and severe scuttle shake, which meant it wasn't nearly as fun to drive as the significantly less floppy Mazda. That led Burkhard Gerschel, then head of BMW's Special Model Series, to push for a hardtop version of the Z3M to rectify the Roadster's dynamic shortcomings, which was immediately rejected by the board. But Gerschel pressed on, promising the bean counters in Munich that as much of the Z3M would be retained to keep costs to a bare minimum. Eventually, the board relented, and the green light was given to put the Z3M Coupe into production.
And it was unlike anything we had seen before. Now, obviously, two-door coupes are nothing new, but this is evidently no ordinary two-door coupe. Everything from the A-pillar forwards has been carried over from the Z3M Roadster, as have the doors. However, the glass, and obviously the roof, is all bespoke to the Z3M Coupe. So why did BMW go with a shooting brake style roof? Well, I couldn't find any hard evidence on it. However, when you see how far back the cockpit is, there really isn't a lot of room to do a more conventional coupe-like roofline. You'd chop off the heads of the occupants, or at least give them no headroom whatsoever. And by doing this, you open up quite a bit of space for those in front, and you get that distinct breadvan-like silhouette. For the most part, the underpinnings were exactly the same as the Z3M Roadster. Behind these blistered wheel arches are M-specific dampers, which are actually a little bit stiffer on the M Coupe to cater for the near tripling in structural rigidity brought in by the fixed roof. Up front, you have 315mm ventilated brakes that have been plucked from the E36 M3 Evolution, and the calipers taken from the E34 M5. Basically, whatever was left in the M parts bin at the time was hoovered up and plonked on the M Coupe. The same goes for the engine. Now, early cars like this 1999 example were fitted with the S50 straight 6 from the E36 M3 Evo, or if you're in America, the S52. Now, as stock, it produced 316 horsepower and 260 pounds-feet of torque. However, this one's been fettled with a little bit, now with a Group M intake and a freer flowing exhaust, bringing power up to 321 horsepower. Then in 2000, BMW got rid of the S50 and replaced it with the S54 from the E46 M3, and that brought power up to 324 horsepower. Both cars used a 5-speed manual gearbox. Now, the E46 M3 had a 6-speed manual, but the Getrag used in the S54 version of this car was a 5-speed. Now, BMW also messed around with the gearing too to hamper its performance, because it didn't want its latest and greatest M3 being beaten by a clown shoe.
Obviously, it's only natural BMW would lift the Roadster's interior for the coupe. Chrome trim around the dials and gear lever was considered quite fancy back in the day, and on this car there's still a few hangovers from its previous owner. But best of all, every Z3 M Coupe came with a retractable net guard, making it a brilliant dog carrier. And of course, you too can sell your car on PistonHeads Auctions. Just hit the link in the description, enter your details, and one of our consignment experts will be in touch. Make sure you register to bid too, because you never know when the next Z3 M Coupe will be going under the hammer. Here's why you should place a bid when one eventually does.
You'd hope that after convincing the board to greenlight your project that it would be met with universal acclaim and order books bursting at the seams with prospective buyers. However, the complete opposite happened. The Z3 M Coupe was a commercial flop, only selling a few thousand examples worldwide. In fact, it was outsold by the Z3 M Roadster by a factor of 10 to 1. Yeesh. It was also really unpopular in the UK for some reason. We seem to love a quirky coupe, especially one that kind of looks like an estate car. But bizarrely, we only sold a few hundred in the UK, if that. So they're exceptionally rare here. It didn't go down all that well with reviewers either, because yes, it had fixed the scuttle shake issues of the Roadster, but by firming it up so much, it didn't actually ride the road all that well. People found it to be far too firm and unforgiving on bumpy, pitted roads, a bit like the one I'm on right now. But that was 1998, and what would have been flagged as perhaps a lack of refinement back then is kind of what we're after in a classic car, because it's raw, it's real, it's analog. It's the reason why we enjoy driving. Especially the case on this old S50 car, because it didn't have any driver aids whatsoever. No traction control, no ABS. It's almost like Germany's take on a TVR. And what you do notice pretty quickly is that even though this is a 25-year-old car now, it still feels very refined. This one's got 130,000 miles on the clock too, and it just feels buttery smooth. The performance is really accessible because you've got that long throttle pedal, but if you really want to go for it, you're just rewarded with lots of revs and that glorious, glorious engine sound. Oh, I'm never get tired of a BMW straight six. And because it doesn't have that hyper-responsive throttle, it does give the M Coupe more of a GT feel. It just makes it very, very easy to drive at low speeds, and it's just calm and relaxed. And if you really want to go for it, well, it's there. You've just got to really hunt up the rev range. So what of the fidgetiness that reviewers were talking about in the 90s? Well, I'm getting the smallest sense of it going down this slightly bumpy road, but again, I'm not expecting a Rolls-Royce pillowy smooth ride down here. It's gonna feel a little unrefined compared to anything modern, but it's an old car. It's not making me feel uncomfortable, particularly in these very cushy GT-style leather seats. What a wonderful noise. Wonderful, wonderful noise. Now the steering adds to that GT feel because we've got an old hydraulic rack in here, but surprisingly it's not especially communicative and not that heavy. It's actually a really, really light steering rack. However, it does feel really, really pointy. Cars of this vintage tend to feel pretty lazy, a little bit numb, but the nose is very, very direct in here. The gearing is pretty long. You'll be comfortably doing over 70 in second gear, and the actual action of the gearbox is typical BMW. It's amazing they've still managed to keep this feel all the way through to the M2 Comp and the manual version of that. It's not going to be for everybody. I personally really love the feel of an M gearbox, but it's not the sharpest, notchiest thing in the world, but it's just got a really satisfying throw to it. When you do change gear, however, the transmission tunnel does actually stick out quite a bit around the clutch. So I find myself going to put my foot on the clutch and actually just hitting the transmission tunnel. Obviously it takes a bit of getting used to, but old cars have their quirks and it doesn't get much quirkier than this. And of course, the quirks are the reason you buy the car, and the engine, but the quirks are a big part of it. And so the funny thing is that yes, it looks a little bit strange on the outside to some. For what it's worth, I've always adored the look of the Z3 M Coupe, and I'm so happy to be driving it today because it really is living up to my expectations. But what's really interesting is because you've got these really low shoulder lines from where the doors would be on the Z3 M Roadster, you've actually got a lot of glass going on. So it's visibility is great. It's actually a very easy car to maneuver, particularly with how small it is. And also, there's great dog carrying potential. As I mentioned earlier, the owner of this car does use this to move his dog about. And what's better than a two-seater sports coupe where you can bring your dog along for the ride? They might get quite sick, but, you know, details. So it's not hard to see why the Z3 M Coupe is such a cult classic car. Because the design, I think, has aged absolutely brilliantly. It's so muscular and refreshing to see these days. It really is controversial BMW at its absolute best. The engine is superb. Yes, the S54 is the slightly more preferred one. It's a little bit rarer, and who doesn't love an S54 powered car? But this S50 engine still has a lot of merits. It really is just such a joy to rev all the way up to the 7,500 RPM red line. And it's actually practical. A modern classic you could genuinely use every day and put stuff in the back, including your dog. What more could you want? But if, like me, you are wanting this very car, then I'm afraid to say you're fresh out of luck. This one has already sold on PistonHeads Auctions, and judging by talking to the buyer this morning, they ain't going to be selling it anytime soon. So the best thing to do is keep checking in to PistonHeads Auctions, because we have plenty of cars going up just like this every week. And you never know when one of those 100 or so UK cars might wind up for auction next.